Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. This is the Two Tokens podcast, and this time it's a remote podcast with people from all over Europe. Our special guest today is Tobias Huber from Decentralized Energy Solutions in Zurich. And we will be discussing solutions with Michel Chatelin, lawyer, and Jos Röling, captain of the Energy Token Working Group. Jos, why don't you first give a brief introduction of the Energy Token Working Group before we ask Tobias to present the Energy Token? And
yeah, sure.
We also explain what we did with Power of the Many, just to refresh the people who are listening.
Yeah, so thank you, Alex. Yeah, so in the Energy Working Group of Two Tokens, we are discovering and pathfinding our way into the energy ecosystem with the ambition to have power to the many in the new energy environment, supporting and accelerating, hopefully, the energy transition. So our first phase of our activity was focused on understanding the application of blockchain and understanding tokens on top of that, in order to see how we can find use cases. And for that, we have did some discovery and some work. So let me share two slides for that that depict it. We started off with understanding of how we should then position tokenization. And the initial use cases we found, and also our first hinge, was to tokenize the energy as packages. And then if you do some analysis, you find that you need actually two. So one based for the energy system, which you can say, well, that's the demand and supply. And very quickly you understand that there are also trading going on in which there is a need of a power notion as well. So we started off with these two tokens as offtake, as we now call it. But very soon we pivoted to the use case, which is very relevant now in Europe, at least, for the new movement from corporate energy to more local energy initiatives by cooperatives, collectives. And there we extended our view and our token set into six almost. So the first one is, I think, most relevant for today's talk, but it gives the context in which our thinking is and our designs, is our fractional ownership. So we understood from clients around Europe that fractional ownership is of interest for energy cooperatives, energy collectives, and other local initiatives. So we designed a token that represents a solar panel. And that inspires all kinds of new kind of use cases, which I come into in a moment. And for the offtake, we understood that the energy industry then talks about power, which is related, for instance, to power purchase agreements, but also other forms of power. Then energy, that's the energy delivered or generated or stored. So that those are the three use cases for the energy part. And if you do renewable energy, then we have the renewable energy certificates, or guarantees of origin, as we call them in Europe. So there are some tokenization ideas and initiatives going on there as well. Most recently, on top of that, there is an initiative fueled by Google with their 24/7 green initiative of their data centers, which is then supported by the Energy Tech initiative in the UK, that gives you more granular certificates. So that certificates are only have a shelf life of 1 hour. And if you do a full instrumentation, if you assume that there is a full IoT world out there, then there is a lot of data that you can collect and harvest and also monetize. And it can be green signals, can be temperature, can be vibrations, and there are all kinds of parties that have interest in data around and associated with renewable energy. Now, in our working group for the last year, we have worked on fractional ownership of solar farms, and that is for a number of applications. So there are some communities in the Netherlands, and also identified in Italy and in the Nordics of Europe, where you want to have a renewable setup that is owned by the members of the energy cooperative. So and first way of implementing that token is to represent that ownership, and then on top of that we can build then, and that's the topic that we have at hand right now, and I not go into detail because there are other podcasts on that, different use cases for the offtake. And also all kinds of new business cases and business models that we can think of. So that's, I think, in a nutshell, right?
A great bridge to Tobias, I think, right? Because the use case that we worked on in the last year and a half was fractional ownership. We call that power of the many. And Tobias, we got in contact last year, and you were explaining what you were doing at Siemens. So maybe you can introduce yourself also for the listeners and for people who don't know you, and what your application is for your energy token.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Happy to do so. So the sustainability officer of the solutions and service business globally for Siemens Smart Infrastructure. I'm located in the Crypto Valley in Zug. So this is already one of the first bridges into blockchain and technology. But combining energy with blockchain in here. So where do we start? I mean, we have left the time where there's a traditional power grid with large power plants and transmission and distribution grids to then the consumers. So we are in a kind of an energy cloud now, where you have prosumers. You have distributed and cleaner two-way power flows with digital platforms. So that means all kind of tokens that Jos, you have just described, you would need. It's about who is the owner of an asset. You need to have the data coming from those assets to really measure the performance. You need to validate power and energy that is distributed or consumed or produced. So all of that comes together. Therefore, we are in a situation that this energy transition requires also a digital transformation of the energy infrastructure.
And so just to be sure, for my understanding, at Siemens, you work at decentralized energy solutions. What does that mean? Are you working with firms and factories to help them set up renewable energy sources? What's the scope of that?
Yeah, so that's a good question to make it crisp for the audience. So the Siemens Smart Infrastructure business was a merge of two former businesses in Siemens. So the one is building technology. So everything around the building, how to get buildings modernized, how to make buildings green, how to make buildings carbon neutral. Yeah. So when we talk buildings, we nowadays talk fleet of buildings. So that means it could be a campus, it could be a district, it could be a full, let's say, portfolio of real estate from a large corporate. And in order to make that carbon neutral, for sure, distributed energy systems, in particular with renewable energy, is within the scope. So having said that, there's a new component coming in, that's e-vehicle charging infrastructure, also tied to the building and built environment. But now you still cannot isolate buildings, even if they become prosumer. You cannot isolate buildings from grid infrastructure. And that was the second part of the merge. That was the business of energy management. So where it's about grid software, about the electrical products you would need for energy transmission and distribution. This is, let's say, the backbone of, let's say, what we want to tokenize.
So can you elaborate on how, on your statement to having trouble to separate the buildings from the infrastructure? Is that behind the meter and in front of the meter kind of solutions that you're talking about? Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, I would not call it a struggle, but you still would need to have the backup from a utility company, from a grid infrastructure. You need to, if you have more demand than you produce, you need to get the supply. If you have more produced than your demand is about, you need to feed it into the grid. So I think you need to have that connectivity, and therefore you act in a larger ecosystem, including the utility companies.
So, and where did that security, that energy token as a security then come in? Because I don't see that connection yet, that bridge.
Yeah, this comes back to, let's say, a dilemma that we experience in the market. So typical customers of ours is a large corporate, no matter which kind of vertical market or industry the corporate is in. So enterprises from automotive, from food and beverage, from chemicals, from pharma, life science, could be everyone. So they were used to get electricity from the plug, literally speaking. Yeah, and they get an invoice from the utility company. Now, when we talk distributed energy systems or building infrastructure becoming a prosumer, this would need investments into such assets. And those assets are non-core to all of the industries because they should produce cars or produce drinks or whatsoever. So therefore, they always seek for someone to finance that and get those assets off the balance sheet.
Yeah.
No
more CapEx.
And
OpEx.
And now to close the loop. So on the other side, I get the calls from institutional investors, in particular the market of impact investing, where it's not just about the risk return ratio, where it is about risk return and impact. Ideally, the impact is guaranteed, which an ESCO company, an energy service company, typically do. And now here comes the opposite of the fractionalization you were talking about, because those institutional investors, they seek for large tickets. They don't look for a single PV field of 1 megawatt. They look for something bigger. So they look ideally for single investments above 100, 150 million. So, and a lot of those distributed energy systems, a lot of, let's say, sustainable assets are below. So on the one hand, by tokenization, you can fractionalize. On the other hand, by tokenization, you can bundle and make the ticket size larger and more attractive for institutional investors.
Yeah. That's interesting, Michel, because this is the opposite of what we did with Power of the Many, which was making big parks, fractionalized, available to the public. But you could use the same technology, the same principle, and turn it around. What does that look like in terms of legal regulatory? The same principle.
Yeah. Before I get into that, I would just like to comment or to ask for what Tobias just said, that in his view, a building owner would not be interested to have an energy asset financed as part of the building, or to be financed separately. If I understood it correctly, that what your comment was. Because what I see actually is that building owners, I fully agree that traditionally they're not familiar with being an energy producer or installing an energy asset and managing that as such. But at the same time, there is a increasing requirement by let's say the tenants to have sustainable buildings, and there's a pressure to make those buildings more sustainable. So you then typically will think of adding a renewable energy asset to it in order to fulfill the energy demand. And that raises the question whether a building as such has a energy producing potential, so an energy potential or value potential in energy terms. And if you also think about the fact that buildings need to show their energy performance, whether it be commercial real estate or also housing, the energy labels, particularly now with the energy crisis we have had or we're still having with such high prices, these energy labels of the buildings have become valuable. So from a building investor or in real estate investor point of view, it now makes sense to also invest in renewable energy assets, which is part of their building, because it at the end will increase the value of your building, and it will tap into the energy producing potential of a building. So there was just to comment on what you said. I think it should always be separated. I think there's also a movement from real estate owners to say, okay, we have to have those energy assets on the building because it increases the value of the building. Now, if we get into specifics of an energy asset and tokenization and regulation, in particular energy market regulation, we're basically facing what I call a dual regulatory challenge, because on the one hand, the electricity, in particular electricity networks, they are heavily regulated. Because it's good to infrastructure, most of them are monopolies, so we have to make sure that access to those infrastructures is open and fair and transparent, non-discriminatory, etc. And on the other hand, if you tokenize assets, so create, let's say, security rights or whatever type of tokens we create, the financial regulatory control comes into play. So there's a big, I think, uncertainty or struggle or challenge to make sure you make things happen without being limited too much about those two regulatory regimes we have.
No, absolutely. Oh, no, sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, but I just pause for a minute so you can really comment otherwise. Yeah.
No, it was what you said is really close to my heart, because this is exactly what happens. So at the end, the technology, namely with blockchain, is available today. So it's there are ways and service providers that know how to do it. But you are creating a security usually. So that means you are fully under the regulation of banking and exchange authorities like SEC in the US or BaFin in Germany or FINMA in Switzerland. So and this is a hard thing. On the other hand, if you look on from the investor side, at the moment, institutional investor has no access to private markets because those are not regulated. So I would envisage that in the next few years, together with the bank authorities and stock exchanges, we will develop a, let's say, framework that at the end, this uncertainty that we all have in the market right now, definitely, this is harmful, will be eliminated and give access to institutional investors to those kind of assets.
Yeah. I really like the concept because of course, this challenge to bridge the gap between the institutional investors and the smaller renewable energy projects has been there from the very, very start. Because when the renewable energy market started to develop, everybody was saying, oh, we need the money of the pension funds because they are, or the institutional investors, because they're satisfied with a lower return on their investments than a typical project developer would be. But you just said at the beginning, the ticket size they're looking for was way too big for an individual project. So you have to construe a package of projects that can then be sold. So, and that's also something you see, of course, in the non-building sector of renewable energy assets, where very large utility scale parks or portfolio of parks are being sold on to institutional investors, but then they will sort of form part of a package, structured as a package, and then sold on. So I was wondering if you have thoughts about how would that work with tokens.
Yeah, you could do a similar thing, in particular, for instance, if you create a special purpose vehicle, an SPV, a legal entity that is the asset owner of multiple assets, and then at the end you could also tokenize the SPV. And therefore you get independent from the real world assets and its geographical location, and bundle it. And but for sure, again, you're then in a regulated market, because at the end it's more or less like a fund product. what you're creating, which is managed to a certain extent. So this is, I would say, the big hurdle and the challenge with the actual regulation, not from the energy market, but coming from the financial market. But there's one more thing I'd like to bring in. So the one thing is get the ticket size larger, that it's interesting for institutional investors, or get the transactions cost lower, that smaller investments make sense or are commercially viable. And this again brings us back to blockchain as an enabling technology. Just imagine that you manage an asset during its entire life cycle with all the relevant data validated on blockchain. So that means you have an asset, and whenever you're in a acquisition a situation or a selling situation, all the information is already there. So you have a kind of a proven data room, relevant information on blockchain. So that means the typical due diligence cost with, I'm looking at you, Michel, with legal services, as well as, let's say, the technical due diligence and the commercial due diligence aspects, you would reduce the effort. So you would make it faster, validated it, and therefore reduce the transaction cost. That will not pay off in the beginning with the first transaction or when you tokenize it. Legal paperwork has to be done, and the initial due diligence has to be done. But then over time, the more and more you trade such an asset, I strongly believe that that reduces the cost.
So the application we have been focusing on is to make it possible for consumers to get passive income by participating in a solar field, right? And even at small tickets. Is that what you're describing here?
Not sure if I understood you right, Alex. So we target the institutional investor, not the consumer. We have estimated those models in energy communities where you have peer-to-peer tradings based on blockchain. So these things we have done already. Not sure if there's enough value from us as Siemens, but where we really see the potential is that we create sustainable assets, and there's a market that seeks for investments in those. And how to match make these kind of projects. First, get the transparency, disclose them, make them available, get them into the dynamic marketplace situation, and then in particular address impact investing. I mean, today, an impact investor, how did he calculate the ESG impact of this investment? It's based on forecast, based on simulation, based on whatever best guess. But the energy service companies market, so the ESCO market, coming from performance contracting, and Siemens is also an ESCO company. We are in this field, we are accredited. We do power purchase agreements, and we do managed service agreements with energy and decarbonization. And we do for sure performance contracting. So we guarantee the energy cost reduction, the energy consumption reduction, and the CO2 effect of our projects. So therefore, there's a lot more planning security for an investor, because risk return he can do. This is where he's expert. But we contribute by giving him confidence that the impact will come. And again, here, if you look around, all those carbon offsetting mechanisms that are in place, they will be more and more under pressure, if you ask me, whether they are audit proof or not.
Yes.
Is the tree planted? Is the tree still there? And so on, to make it very simple.
Yes, so and then to chime in on your statement that you want to have then a proven data room. So is that proven data room only for the assets, the setup, and the contracts that are being associated with it, down to what you just said, the performance contract that have some commitment and guarantees of CO2 reductions? Is that sufficient? Or are you looking then for more a live data room where all the offtake and the measurements are also being shared in a data room for investors? So if you then trade at a later point in time, that you have a track record of your performance of the asset itself.
I think there's no need for having it in real time. Therefore, we have cloud-based platforms and management systems. So this is, and they still will be there. You will have your energy management system running that is gathering all the data and so on, and other automation and management systems. But where, for me, blockchain comes into play is that whenever there's a reporting period, there's an incident, there's an alarm, any kind of event. So whenever there's something you really want to report, or maybe when it's about relevant data, you want to verify this data and have it validated. Then for me, this is where I take the value and put it on blockchain. Not the exponential growing IoT devices that create in highest resolutions real-time data. I think that's not the purpose where blockchain is.
No, yeah, I agree. I think I expressed myself not clearly enough. So what with live, I mean regular updates. Yeah. So current data rooms are created by the initiation of your project, and only minimum data is added over time. Yeah. So usually annual statements, and that's it. As a new investor, when you evaluate your participation. Mm-hmm. But if you have that data feed from your IoT system, from your SCADA system, from your as more as indisputable, entered into the data room rather than official statements as annual financial statements, then I think it would be more valuable. But that's what I want to understand from you.
Yeah, and and then at the end, I mean, you with your background in IBM, I mean, you have Maximo and Tririga, so you also collect data. We have a building suite where we do the building automation and where we do energy management. So all those existing cloud-based platforms, they will be relevant. And then it's up to, let's say, the needs of an investor to see what kind of data would you need and in which resolution or how actual that needs to be.
Yeah, as to tokens, we are particularly interested in the application, right? So the technology underneath, whether it's blockchain tokenization, just the means to end. And in this whole energy transition, we see two sides of the coin. On the one hand, you have the energy communities where prosumers are existing, local for local, those types of things. And the other side is, of course, the institutionals. But both have a need for tokenization. And hence my question, right? If we were to have a perfect world, the systems that Siemens is putting in place would, in the end, enable any consumer to buy a part of an energy asset and have that be part of his pension or what have you as a return. But that's not the approach that Siemens is going for right now, right? You go for the institutionals, for the big tickets. So my question is, do you have any understanding of how big that market of potential is?
Yeah, I mean, you can take those data from like the GIN, the Global Impact Investors Network, and then extrapolate what's the market for that is energy related, what is the market that is decarbonization related, and so on. So definitely this is a skyrocketing market, because investors are more cautious and shift their investments towards impact investing. So even the money that is already invested there, that there's a shift. So some of the, to make it obvious, like investments in oil and gas and coal mining and coal power plants, those investments are typically have hard times nowadays, and investments are shifted towards more either sustainable technology or, let's say, forward-thinking technology. I mean, we were talking about this typical examples of wind and PV or green buildings, but also green hydrogen. There's so much more coming up that needs upfront investments, and where you may benefit from subsidies, governmental subsidies, or tax reliefs, tax credits. Yes, I believe this is a very much growing market, and if we even make the step further from when we look on ESG metrics from the environmental, the obvious KPI of carbon emissions avoided or reduced, it's also about the others with social. So where it's about safety for people, health aspects for people. There's so much more, water and so on. So we could spend an hour just on the ESG metrics that
it's I'm realizing now with how you explain it, that this is not about tokenizing the let's say the ownership right. So the let's say the shares of the SPV that holds all the assets, and to tokenize those rights to be transferred to the investors. But it's about tokenizing, put in blockchain all the data that's generated with renewable energy asset or any kind of other energy saving measures or whatever you have, which is relevant for ESG purposes, within that asset, that building or that energy asset, if I understand correctly, so that then you have data available. Either it makes it easier to see what the risk is of an asset once you purchase it, but also to show the performance of those assets for ESG purposes. Is that correct?
Both is right. Both is right. I would not say the one or the other. So therefore, it depends on what is your underlying financial vehicle. If it's a power purchase agreement, you want to tokenize, then you're more into you tokenize the kilowatt hours, yeah, and not the asset. If it's about really financing a new asset or transferring an asset from one owner to another one, then I would say it's a direct. It's about the direct ownership of the asset that you want to tokenize. And in many cases, you need a systematics in place to monitor, report, and validate the performance of the asset and the KPIs you are measured on. So therefore, I would say it's not the one or the other. It's almost all of them. And then the technology will show us what can be combined. So the recent things we were looking at, and we had a hackathon just concluded last week, a global hackathon within Siemens, was to look on dynamic NFTs, for instance, whether dynamic NFT could be the appropriate token solution, where you have an asset reflected by their non-fungible token, direct ownership of it, but at the same time that the dynamic NFT with, let's say, dynamic data and smart contracts and oracles allows you to have an asset represented during its life cycle with its relevant performance data.
That's interesting. So it's the big Siemens, you are working on NFT projects. How does that work? There's some exposure in terms of people perceiving NFTs. So I'm really surprised by this. Was this within the confines of a hackathon, or? And everybody read the news about Siemens corporate finance, you know, what you did in February. So Siemens are really ahead of the curve, seems like.
Yeah, we are a small, but let's say good community of blockchain experts in the company. Yeah, from legal, in particular when it comes to financial law and tax law. Then our colleagues in corporate finance, treasury, with the news you were just referring. So for the first tokenized bond that we released to the market. And we also had an NFT, our first NFT for the 175 years anniversary of Siemens, giving to politicians and VIP guests. Yeah, so that means we had to be 100% assured that this is fully compliant with all kind of laws. And back to the dynamic NFT, this is like we are in an ideation phase. This was a result of the hackathon that 2 out of 3 finalists that we have chosen, they have decided for a dynamic NFT as appropriate token.
Are you going to be publishing the results of this hackathon? Is there somebody where the listeners can find information about this?
Yeah, there's so that has been recorded. So I can share the link with you, so you can see the recorded session and at least listen to the winner's presentation.
Yeah. Sounds very interesting. I'm very surprised, Jos. Huh? So
yeah, indeed. Yeah.
it's very good work. This, okay, the final thought, final question. Who wants to have that final question?
Yeah, so I have a question, so Tobias. So what do you think is the biggest inhibitor to move the needle forward in the energy domain?
I mean,
Good question.
I mean, I come back to Michel, you also referred to. So you need to first, let's say, look on the complexity within the stakeholder metrics. Who's your stakeholder? And in many cases, no matter if you're on the building side or on the grid side or the utility side or on an energy consumer community side, you have an asset owner, you have someone who operates the asset, you may have a tenant, someone who uses electricity, yeah, or power in general. So you need to have a value proposition for all of them. You need to make it tangible for all of them. And I think this is one of the big challenges coming from the acceptance in the market and how responsive the market will be for change. And then all under the boundaries of the laws on the energy market and the financial market. So it's coming top down and bottom up, and you need to work and lobby on in both directions.
It's right. It's bottom up and top down. And here at the foundation, we try to not only do the ideation and think out these great concepts, but actually do them and preach what you do what you preach. And so we see that within Europe, if you look at Austria, Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, Germany, they're all going at a different cadence. And I think as a community, we need to create coalition of the willing to actually do these projects. How do you see that in you? Because you're all over Europe as well. What do you see? Is it as difficult in every country? Would it be possible to maybe select a couple of projects in different European and present those?
Yeah, that's the beauty working for Siemens, is that I have access, or we have those customers. We can identify customers that are open-minded, that are also willing to say, hey, let's go for a proof of concept. It's not a rock solid product or solution that we have in place. We want to try something new. Yeah, and even it's not only about the engineering solution that needs to be innovative. It's about the financing solution or the underlying technology that needs to be innovative. So therefore, there's always a potential to do that with existing Siemens customers. And then indeed, you need to look on the regulatory environment where you want to do it. And I mean, with the complexity we have, it's not about you select a country. You need to look in a country to the state, and in a state to the city, in order to really figure out whether you are able to realize that or not. What I would see as a disadvantage, if I may say so, for Western countries in Europe, or if you take North America, it's very regulated. So there's not so much freedom to try something new. This is why if you look on venture capitalists, they always would love to see you to go to South America, to Africa, where you have not such a regulated space to try something new. But that would not be the set of countries we are aiming for to give it a start. We have the ambition to say, if it would work, for instance, in Germany, if we would have, for instance, a BaFin agreeing to what we have in mind, then we feel more safe and secure for our planning process and investments.
Yeah, especially with MICA and what BaFin is ahead of the curve with the crypto gazettes and EBPF. That seems to be more possible in Germany than in the rest of Europe, which is really interesting. Final question for Michel? What do you see in Europe in terms of what's possible and what's not?
Well, let's then limit it to application of blockchain-based solutions in the energy sector. right? I think there, on the one hand, what you see, of course, from the energy regulatory side, or it's the energy policy side, is this, which was already mentioned, this push to, let's say, democratize energy production and sharing the access or the energy itself, or giving access to energy assets through the energy regulations or energy policy framework designed by the European Commission, which creates the need for solutions that enable actually exchange of energy between users, eventually on a consumer scale. But at the same time, we have an energy regulatory framework, which is implemented in all the different member states in different sorts and forms, which restricts actually the possibility to enable peer-to-peer energy exchange or these more innovative solutions. And so that needs to be designed basically from a legal point of view to make that work. And then on top of it, you have the financial regulatory aspect, the concern, which is basically focused on consumer protection. So in that sense, it's a part of the market. So I would say that perhaps the innovation should also come from B2B solutions, so business to business solutions, where you're not confronted with these let's say consumer protection laws. So it's a bit easier to implement those projects as compared to B2C solutions. So I would say B2B, that's the way to go. And of course, I would love to see regulatory safe havens where you can experiment, but those also need to be created. So the question is, what takes longer? Create those havens, or just start doing the projects and then try to change the law step by step?
Well, thank you, gentlemen. This was, we could talk for another 45 minutes. I suggest we do that again, but then, hone in on another subject. Tobias, you're very much invited to participate in the expert session on this subject that we will be hosting at the end of May. It would be awesome, really nice to have you there. And an invitation from the working group, Jos is the captain, is to participate and maybe come forward with one or two proof of concepts where we can actually do things with the Coalition of the Willing. Thank you all. This was an energizing podcast, and I look forward to talking to you next.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Appreciate and like the exchange with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was it for today's podcast. Thank you for listening in, and please subscribe so you don't miss out on our upcoming episodes. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find our contact details at www.twotokens.org.